I can't believe that it's already the penultimate panel. I feel like it's been a really lovely rolling 2 days, and it should go on for two more days, 3 more days. And maybe we will do that sometime soon again. I have to say a little bit about why I'm here, because I'm not a historian, I'm not an archivist. I don't really spend a lot of time with old manuscripts or even new manuscripts. So there must be some kind of an explanation as to why I'm here and why I agreed to be here in first place, because I was asked and I jumped at it and said I will do it. I'm a geographer. I'm trained as a geographer, and I think of places as repositories of all kinds of traces. And a lot of my work has been inspired as a teacher, as a writer, as a geographer by some bits and pieces of Gramsci's work that I take very seriously. And one of them is an injunction to all of us, which starts with reminding us that history deposits in each of us an infinity of traces, but it doesn't give us an inventory, right? And the task of critical elaboration, therefore, must start with compiling such an inventory, right? And that, to me, is the work of archive. How do we put the catalog together for an archive? Because over the last nearly 20 years of my work, if there is one thing that I have done with a lot of commitment, it is the work of putting together catalogs of all kinds of things, of stories, of people, of traces, of spatial data of various kinds, because it's the precise way in which you put together the catalog that actually makes a lot of difference to what the artifact eventually will lead to. So whether you're putting together a performance, whether you're putting together a document, whether you're putting together an event, whether you're putting together a collection, it is in the end the work of putting together a catalog of traces that history deposits in each of us in some form or the other. And my specific engagement with this issue of archives actually began in Calcutta 3 years ago, when a friend of mine told me that he has his personal papers, which he has been sitting on for the last 40 years, very carefully accumulated. And I've known since then a lot of people who have done precisely this, that starting from the 1980s, a lot of activists in India have kept every single piece of paper that they had ever worked with a lot of discipline, a lot of commitment. And they said that this sometimes reminds me of the movie called The Field of Dreams, which is a Kevin Costner film, in which there's this guy who's constantly waiting because in his dreams he keeps hearing this line that keeps telling him that he will come. So somebody is going to come at some point of time, so you need to hold on to this for that one person who's going to come later. And to me, that is actually the most important work of archiving, in the sense that an archive is not something which is consciously created. You write a book, the notes that you write put together to write the book become the archive. The book goes into the library, but your notes goes into the archive, right? So it's kind of done without that conscious planning to produce an archive. It happens along the way. It's all the bits and chips and pieces of stuff that you're working with that need to be compiled together, held together in some way. And the imperative is to put it together, hold it together with enough metadata in it, with enough ability for us to work through it, so that we can open up new narratives each time you go to it. And I think that's the challenge, and I really wanted to hear how people who do this full time think about it and how do they work with it, right? And the thing that really made me feel that I should be there is that expression, what is the historical necessity at this point of time, and how are institutions responding to that historical necessity or historical compulsion. Right? And historical necessity is a very serious word, right? It is not something that you can take lightly. It doesn't leave you with too many options. It tells you in some kind of a normative way that this is the thing that must be done. It's almost like that what's to be done kind of question of Lenin, ki kya karna hai? What is it that we really need to do? So what is that compulsion? What is that need that is prompting us now to do? And what I thought would be very useful is to reflect on the big questions that Aru has just listed out, which is the staffing of the organization, the policies that you make to keep the inclusivity of the archive, how do you bring in new voices, what techniques do you use, what technologies do you use, all of those, we can think them through three broad points of intersection for all the speakers. And those are, to me, the need for curation, which is a need that I believe has become very, very important in the last few years. Because archives, as we have known them, as many speakers have pointed out, belong to settled history. Right? It's the state authority, it's the institutions that have already figured out what their story is. That's where the institutional archive belongs. Right? Now there seems to be some kind of a moment, an intellectual, political moment for us now, which is prompting us to say that settled history needs to be unsettled. We need to find ways of making it possible for people to retell those histories, and therefore you need to keep constantly creating new curations. And I think that the curation is the most important word, basically because it allows you to create a provisional closure without closing it permanently in any way. Curation is that act of doing that one provisional closure for this moment, leaving open the possibility of closing it in all kinds of other ways. And I think that's one important thing that a lot of institutions which are sitting on repositories are feeling. How do we do this, right? The second thing is the question of how do we respond to this contemporaneity of our repositories? What do we do with what we are holding? What is the way in which we specify this current moment? In what ways can we actually make this happen? And the third thing that comes out of these two, that is the need for curation, the need for responding to the contemporaneous moment, is the need for collaboration. Because if you want to create multiple voices, multiple openings, you can't do it without collaborating with others. And for institutions that are sitting on huge archives and repositories, these collaborations are not easy. These openings to curations are not easy because they open up all kinds of uncertainties and they create anxieties that institutions cannot really handle very easily, right? So how are each of these three big institutions or four big institutions dealing with these things is what would really be a great conversation to have. The way we are going to do this is each of the four speakers in the panel are going to make a short presentation of 10 to 15 minutes, and then I'm going to prompt them to respond to this question of collaboration, of contemporaneity and curation, and how that plays out in their work. And then I'm going to give each of the panelists an opportunity to put a question to the other panelists, because that's one set of conversations that would be really, really great to hear, because they all come from very different kind of institutional spaces, and then we'll open it up for the floor. Yeah. So thank you very much. I'm going to now ask our first speaker, Namita. You want to go? Our first speaker, Namita Waikar, is the co-founder and managing editor at the People's Archive of Rural India, Pari, where she also writes for and anchors the Grind Mill Songs project, and she's a partner in a chemistry database firm in Pune. Please.
Yeah, thank you, Anant. Thank you, Arundhati, Ritvika, and the IFA team for inviting me here. And it's been a very immersive and learning experience for me. And the different panel discussions have given me ideas about how I might use them in furthering the cause of PARI and creating new story ideas for PARI. So I'll start off talking a little about how PARI started. So our founder is P. Sainath, the veteran journalist. Many of you would have heard about him. So he worked for about 35 years in rural India, and he had an idea about preserving that work in some museum kind of a format. And his friends and associates, they had a discussion, and they realized that if it is a physical museum somewhere, then it may not be possible for everyone to access. So, and online media was just coming out during those days, and then he decided that we could have it in an online format. And coincidentally, it also happened that around that time I was trying to research for my novel. It got published much later, but I was writing a novel which had a large portion of it about farmers, and I contacted Sainath, and that's how my interaction with PARI started. So when PARI was launched in 2014, I became a part of it along with a lot of other volunteers, and this is what we actually started doing. So I'll come to this image later, but PARI is a very visually driven site, so I've used a lot of photographs in each of the slides. This is one of my favorite photographs because not only is it beautiful, but it also tells you a story about that woman's life in the village. So how did PARI come about? So according to the 2011 census, we have about 833 million people in rural India. Now the number is much higher. But does the media really represent their voices? We know that it doesn't. According to some media studies, only about 0.24% of mainstream media front pages cover stories from rural India. Usually the involvement is more about, in case there's a disaster or there is some politically sensitive issue, that's when rural India is covered. So that's where PARI came in. Our tagline is everyday lives of everyday people, and we try to tell the stories of everyday people. So we try to cover these stories from about 100 regions of India. These are geographical, historical, cultural regions. For example, in Maharashtra, you have Marathwada, Vidarbha, Western Maharashtra, Southern Maharashtra, etc. And Khandesh, which includes some of the regions in Northern Maharashtra. And so that's how PARI came into being. It started as, we are a non-profit trust. It's called the Counter Media Trust. And so funding is a major issue. Initially, there was a lot of euphoria because we said, okay, it's going to be a volunteer-driven organization. Everybody is going to volunteer their stories, volunteer their time. It went very well for some time, but people do need to earn as well. So, staffing requirements increased. And while we didn't have any yearly targets like a commercial organizations, the number of stories that people contributed, the number of volunteers who wanted to join PARI and do something, that kept growing. So that itself meant that we have to add more people to handle, all this, to edit the stories, to edit the photos and the videos and put them up. So our funding requirements depended on trying to realize all these possibilities. So in terms of diversity and inclusivity, not only does PARI try to cover a vast area of the livelihoods and the labors of people who live in rural India, some of whom are given here on the slide, toddy tappers, well diggers, farmers of course, weavers, many of whom are losing out on their livelihoods because of, developments, globalization, what have you. But also stories of health justice, food justice, education justice, and accessibility to the facilities which, the 10% of us from the privileged part of our society that Charlene referred to, we take them for granted, but which are not available there. So while we cover this journalistically, the other function of PARI as an archive, we try to cover issues of culture, music, etc., which are also archived on our website. This is a painting by Labani Jangi. One of her paintings is also on the conference brochure. She was a researcher at Jadavpur University, researching on the issue of migrants, and also an artist. So she is also one of the people who contributes to PARI regularly. And we have many such people, not only professional journalists or trained journalists, but people from different aspects of say humanities or of the workforce. The way we disseminate PARI and our outreach program now, there's a story behind how we got funding for PARI education. So there was a student in one of the US universities, and she happened to read Sainath's first book, Everybody Loves a Good Drought, and learnt about the rural realities of India, and because she was to review that book for an assignment. And then the next thing she did was she called her parents who are industrialists in Mumbai, and she told them, like, you guys never told us anything about this. You didn't tell us anything about rural India, and it's such an unknown to us. So that drove them to sort of, when they formed a foundation to fund such organizations. So their single mandate to us was, through PARI education, that we educate students in elite schools about rural India. So that kind of, created a new avenue for our projects, and PARI education got a new sort of energy because of that. So other ways in which we also disseminate to students and general readers is through our PARI library, which consists of a research library which students can use. A lot of reports are available there to download. We also summarize them and create notes which students can look at and figure out whether they really need this report or they need to look at another report. And of course there's social media, which PARI Network is the handle for our social media. And the other way we do get in touch with people is through conferences like this one, and I hope to interact with many of you after this. So this particular photograph is actually an illustration by a student, as the slide says. So PARI education did one of their initial stints at St. Joseph's Boys High School in Bangalore, and the students who never interact with anyone from rural India, leave alone, even say the security guards or the domestic helpers who come home, they have no idea about what their life was like before they came to the city. So this project sort of helped them to initiate a conversation with them, First of all, instead of calling the security guard just, so-and-so, to asking them their name, asking them where they came from, starting a conversation and then realizing that, okay, they are human beings like us, they have families, because if there are students from, say, middle school to high school, there are some very basic questions and basic issues that they are not aware of because that's not really part of the curriculum. So this is what helps us bring in that awareness among urban students and general readers. So what does PARI people mean? It means everybody that is involved in PARI, which is all our journalists, reporters, videographers, photographers, and we also involve, like the photograph that on the left is obviously our team in PARI at an annual conference in 2019. On the right is Jayamma. So she is an Adivasi living in the forests in Karnataka, and she photographed a leopard. So this was part of a project where indigenous communities are encouraged to tell their own stories. So other than reporters and researchers telling these stories, we also ask people to tell their own stories, people from rural India to tell their own stories. And in terms of an archive, for the last, it's almost 7 years now, and there are a lot of stories which I would encourage you to go and look at, which our challenge is to try to capture what's happening in our current times as well as curate stories from the past. So this is the kind of coverage that we have, especially the COVID-19 coverage and the climate change series, but also the series on women's health. So it captures stories that really amaze you, you know, in terms of how women deal with childbirth in rural India. Some of them climbing hills to even get to a place where they can meet a midwife who can deliver their child, and including the pathetic states that primary health care centers are in. This photograph, as you can see, is taken from Ladakh, where they had the COVID-19 vaccination program. So our reporters go all over India to get these kind of stories. And so we'll go into the funding aspects during our discussions, but basically our operation is supported by individual donations, donations from trustees, as well as from foundations, non-profit institutions, and CSR funds. We are trying to build a corpus, and yesterday I heard a conversation where we talked about people not asking for money when they have an opportunity to. So here I am openly asking any one of you who wants to donate to PARI, you're most welcome. Please get in touch with me. And also that collaboration with IFA has been so good for us, not only because of the kind of fellowships we've got and the kind of people we've got to do these fellowships, but as a word of mouth interaction, we also got another fellowship from Rinalini Mukherjee Foundation, which is again artists from different areas who are going to help us. And I think that brings me to the end of my presentation. I'll request them to play a short video. I didn't get a chance to speak about the Grandmill Songs project that I'm working on, but I'll show it in the form of that video. It gives a range of the kind of topics that the Grandmill Songs cover, and tells us about how relevant these issues are even today, about women's labor, about the kind of challenges they go through as part of a society that is, you know, patriarchal and so much influenced by
देह राबतो भाड्यानी ना माझा देह राबतो भाड्यानी. आरण्या गवनामंदी.
Space and medicine in Bangalore.
Talk, and I would really like to thank the IFA team for actually giving us this platform where each of us have been able to get our projects and talk about it, get inputs. I think that's the most important thing in any project that we do. So Major General S.L. Bhatia has made eminent contributions to clinical research in physiology, the development of science, and the reconstitution of the Indian medical services prior to as well as after independence. After completing his studies in University of Cambridge and serving in the First World War, he came back to India and joined the Grant Medical College as a professor of physiology and hygiene, which is non-existent right now. But he also became the first Indian dean of the Grant Medical College and later served as a Director General of Medical Services with the Government of India. He was a polymath who was interested in medicine, science, research, philosophy, ethics, as well as religion. It was in 1963. Can we move to the next slide? Oh, okay, thanks. No. Yeah. So it was in 1963 that the Dean of St. John's Medical College, Dr. Louis Montero, invited Major General Bhatia to be the first emeritus professor of the History of Medicine department, because St. John's had just started as an institution, and one of the visions of the St. John's was to give to its students a holistic education in health. So this is a very rare thing that you see that a history of medicine department was started. So it was in 1974, later on, that Major General Bhatia actually set up the History of Medicine Museum here. He also endowed his property in Hyderabad, that was in Banjara Hills, which is not with us anymore. But it was a vision that he held on to, stating that we will not depend on college for their grant, but this will help in sustaining the research as well as the posts that are created in the department as such. So I think you guys have seen mostly how the museum is spaced out. We have divided the museum thematically. It is linear in nature to a very large extent, because we have a lot of children who visit our museum, as well as outsiders, not from the field of medicine as such, who come, and usually curated walks are given to them. So we have curated this collection depending on the feedback that we have got from the audience as such. So it's a small space. It's not a typical museum space as such, because this was actually before in the basement of the college. My HOD, who is now retired, Dr. Mario was actually able to get it out of the basement of the college where it was stacked in boxes. And then he created this space there in St. John's Research Institute. This is called as the Museum Block, where the institutional museum as well as the History of Medicine Museum, along with the Health and Humanities division, is there. So this might look like a place where a lot of people work, but it's just two people. It's me and my colleague Dr. Manjulika Vaz. So moving on. So what does the collection consist of? It basically consists of artifacts like what you see here, an optical microscope. So what we have tried to do with the limited resource as well as the capacity that we have is to curate a story around the microscope. Things like this, objects like this. And then we have the second reprints of the History of Medicine paintings. That was again a part of Major General S.L. Bhatia's collection. This was a commissioned painting by a pharmaceutical company called as Park Davis, and it was painted by Robert Thom. The first ones, what we have heard, is in MIT, and the second reprints were sent to many major institutions around the world, St. John's being one. So these paintings are very interesting because, of course, it's from a very Eurocentric perspective, but it's also a recreation of the Renaissance painting that was done. It captures a lot of story of medicine from the European perspective, but there are also, some things that are, Charaka and Sushruta are also represented, but I don't think so it's very noteworthy as such. We had the Major General S.L. Bhatia collection, that is the primary collection on which everything in our museum is built. So we have his original speeches that was made during plague. He was the Dean of the Grant Medical College then in Bombay. We also have his important contributions when he was setting up health systems in Hyderabad as well as in Assam and Madras later. We have Dr. Sunil Pandya, who is a retired neurosurgeon, who was actually who set up the IJME, that is the Indian Journal of Medical Ethics, one of the premier ethics journal in India. He was very much interested in curating the story of Grant Medical College. So his entire research collection is with us. Likewise, we have Dr. Prakash Shetty, who was a professor at the Tropical School of Medicine in London. He was very interested in looking at the South Indian temples and how bodies are represented in South Indian temples. And we were able to curate a short exhibition during pandemic. And these pictures were basically taken in the 1970s with a small grant that he got at this point in time. He has covered the Vijayanagara period as well as some parts of Tamil Nadu as well as Andhra Pradesh. These were almost 700 photographs that came to us. We were able to, kind of catalog it and make a metadata out of it with the help of another historian as such. And the story that we created was very interesting because it was a person who was from the performing arts background who actually curated this story for us. And we were able to actually point out various kinds of dwarfism as well as achondroplasia, birth that was being represented in the South Indian temples as such. Then, of course, Dr. Mridula Ramanna, I think most of you might have heard about her. She has written a lot on infectious diseases in Bombay as well as curated work on the diseases there too. And Dr. Shirish Kavadi is an independent historian who's working in public history, public health. And he has curated the story of philanthropic organizations. For example, Indian Institute of Science, AIMS, and post-independent period. So all these things are research archives. Okay, we have actually got their books. The books actually have gone into the library, but there are these small notes or the research articles that they have referred to in course of their journey, which has actually gone into the archives. We also have in some cases, like Dr. Prakash Shetty's, his pictures that were taken of the space of St. John's, when there was nothing around St. John's except the lake. So some things like this have become a part of the museum. So why doctors and why people who are in history of medicine? Basically, we are a part of a larger institution. We are a department. A museum as such was added later on to the department. So we curate the story of these historians as well as medical doctors who otherwise might not be curated in their own colleges. Sunil Pandya, for example, one of the top neurosurgeons in India from KEM College, retired from there, but he thought that it was better to give it to Bhatia Museum because we were curating a story that was not his research story only, but also the contributions that he has made to history of medicine and ethics. Just moving forward, what are the different things that we do? Research is because we are centered in the research institute, and Manjulika and I actually work on different research projects. Research is something that we actually open our archives to, and we have people who have referred to Bhatia archives. We have had people from various parts of the world coming to us, but post-COVID, many of them don't come, but they request for these things to be digitized and sent to them. All of this, at least Shirish Kavadi's and Dr. Mridula Ramanna's, we have digitized it, and it has been catalogued. and it is saved on Google Drive, which we share it with whoever requests, and it's all free of cost. So this is from Sunil Pandya's collection. We have certain medical textbooks, as well as books that were written on health systems as such in the 17th. Our oldest book is probably from 1699 or something. It was from England that we got it. But there are also other things like the work that St. John's has done during epidemics, pandemics, as well as natural disaster. The photos that you see is the first set of doctors who was sent to when there was a Bangladeshi refugee crisis. They actually came to West Bengal and we have this entire photo archive as well as letters. We have very beautiful love letters that were written by doctors who are in Calcutta to their girlfriends, wives, and whoever it is, and all that has been curated in this. So what are the different kinds of things that we do? Children, we love children because I think that's the place where there is so much energy. It actually energizes you to do more with so many questions. We reach out to children mostly from the private schools. We have not been able to, we have tried and not been able to reach out to the municipal schools, but we are in talks with Azim Premji University right now, who are keen to get their students to the museum. It's a full day activity usually, where we have storytellers, we have artists who come and work with children in different capacities. We also have college students from BA colleges who actually come and look at the museum and then try to catalog and curate it in any way that they can help us, as well as we are learning things from them and they are learning things from us. Medical students, it's just off late with the collaborations. I think we will talk about it when we start the conversation, who have started coming to us. I will tell you why they have suddenly found the interest to come to us, but yeah, that's something that we do. So collaborations, we do it at different levels. This is the first arts collaboration that we are doing. Apart from that, we actually collaborate with universities across the world, working on different projects, like the typhoid history was a curated project that we did. The exhibition is online, where a lot of research work, almost 2 years of research work has gone into it, where we curated the history of typhoid in Bangalore specifically. Where we have looked at sanitation workers, the archives, in different ways. We have also looked at the Amma temples in Bangalore. The ethnographic study of those temples were also done and made a part of this. But we are not able to put it all out in the museum because of the space constraint that we have. Thank you. I was well within time.
Thanks, Radhika. We now have Natasha. Natasha Fernandez is a curator of the Museum of Christian Art in Goa. She was awarded a scholarship by Calouste Gulbenkian Foundation, Portugal, and the Museum of Christian Art Goa in 2006-2007. She's coordinated several museum projects and curated experiences and heritage walks in Old Goa.
Thank you, Anant, and thank you, IFA, Arundhati, Radhika, and all of you for being here, and thank you for having invited me to be part of this beautiful conference, so well organized, I must say it before we end. And happy to be here to share a little bit more. You heard a lot about MoCA this morning in Kevin's wonderful presentation about the podcast and how he got working on the podcast. But to give you all a little glimpse into what MoCA is, how it came to be. So the Museum of Christian Art was set up in 1994. It was an effort of many people that came together and culminated in the setting up of the museum in 1994. People from Goa, art lovers, people like Mario Miranda, who was part of INTAC, who roped in INTAC to come and help the Archdiocese of Goa to set up this museum, and the Calouste Gulbenkian Foundation, which is a foundation based in Lisbon. So right from the beginning, we started a collaborative journey. So INTAC, Kalus Gulbenkian Foundation, the Archdiocese came together to set up the museum. It was set up in a seminary in the south of Goa called the Rashol Seminary, and we were there for a few years and moved to Old Goa in 2002. Why did we move here? We are talking about days before GPS, and Rashol, though it is a beautiful location, was very difficult for people to access. There was just one bus every hour from Margaon to Rashol. And if you're talking about a museum, we want people to come into a museum space. And there were many other reasons, but principally it was people were not able to access the museum very easily. So we moved to Old Goa, and the Archdiocese helped us find a space within Old Goa which we could utilize as a museum space. It is not in the center of all the activity that happens in Old Goa. So we are not right at the Basilica of Bon Jesus where you find the relics of Saint Francis Xavier. But on a little hill called the Holy Hill lies this massive convent. You can see the flying buttresses. Asia's first convent to be built in the early 17th century. Now when it was built to house cloistered nuns, and once they entered the space, they never again left the space. They spent all their time within that space. Just to give you an idea of how big it is. It's a massive structure. It would accommodate over 100 nuns in the earlier centuries. It ceased to be a convent, cloistered convent in the middle of the 19th century. Today, it is run as an institution for nuns who come to study philosophy and theology. And one small portion of the convent is where the museum is. And that's the only access to the convent that you get. Because since the nuns use the rest of the convent, you don't get to go into this beautiful space. But the church and the museum is what the public gets to see. So here we go, into the museum. So this is our entrance. You've seen all three objects during the last 2 days. The Nirmala Mata. It's a very small ivory image of the Virgin Mary draped in a sari, standing on a lotus. But you also see the crescent moon, and you see the dove of the Holy Spirit above her head. Indicators or iconographic representations of the Virgin Mary. The pelican, tabernacle and monstrance. It doesn't look like a pelican, and we heard earlier today why. Because the artist may have never have seen a pelican, and he was asked to create this sculpture of a pelican. For those who missed maybe the morning session, the pelican is a iconographic representation of Christ, because it was believed in medieval times the pelican is piercing her chest and feeding her babies her own flesh. So you can see the little fledglings near her chest, and the mother pelican piercing her chest. And in her chest cavity is actually the monstrance. Now what is a monstrance? A monstrance is a container in which you keep the host, a flat bread-like wafer which symbolizes Christ. And the bird is perched on a globe which symbolizes the tabernacle. A tabernacle is usually seen in an altar. It's a small niche where we keep the small host which is distributed during communion. Now it was made as a combination, a monstrance and a tabernacle, and in this size, it's 4 feet in height. It was made for the convent of Santa Monica in the 17th century. And apparently, from some of the sources that we have read, it was used only on Maundy Thursday. That's the day when Christ shares his bread and wine with his apostles. So that day is the day before Good Friday, is called Maundy Thursday, and that was the day when this object was used. It was used in the church by the nuns. When the convent was abandoned, this object moved to the cathedral in Old Goa. And when the museum was set up, it came back into the museum. And interestingly, now we can say it's come back into its original home, where it was actually meant to be. And then we see the Good Shepherd, Jesus the Good Shepherd, sitting on this rock in a thinking posture. So all these three objects that we are looking at, we can see very subtle, sometimes subtle influences which are Indian, while the concept came to us from the European missionaries that we had to make, the artist had to make this image of baby Jesus or Christ crucified or the Virgin Mary. But you see subtle influences which are from the local area emerging into these sculptures. There's also the infant Jesus in cradle. So we have the nativity crib set where Christmas is around the corner, and we have these beautiful crib sets that we make at Christmas time, and we put the baby Jesus into the nativity crib. Now usually if you notice, baby Jesus is represented like this. But in these images of the baby Jesus, he's with his finger on his lips. And he has bracelets and anklets and a waistband, and he's sleeping in a, not a cradle, a bed, but it reminds us, or at least all the visitors who come and I engage with tell me, ye to hamara Bal Krishna hai. So what the museum highlights, in fact, is while we showcase Christian art and while we showcase Christian art from the Portuguese period in Goa, we are highlighting these elements which we say Indian or local influences on Christian art. The other image is a painting on paper of the Virgin and Child. It's done in the Mughal miniature style, and it's got a multi-layered frame. And the outermost frame is very interesting because we call it filigree. But correct me if I'm wrong, if I can make references to Tarakasi from Orissa. So there are these inspirations that have been drawn into lots of these Christian artworks. Textiles. If I go into the churches of Goa today, very few of the churches will have textiles as old as the ones that we have in the museum. Why? Because they deteriorate really fast, and maybe they've not been cared for, maybe not stored properly, and they've disappeared. But some of the churches did look after them, and when the opportunity arose, when the museum was set up, they have offered these to the museum. This is actually one banner, you're seeing both the sides, and in the center you'll see the images of Saint Joseph and the Virgin Mary. Saint Joseph, his face and his hands are in ivory. Now ivory work on textiles is very rare, and we have so far found it only on textiles in Goa, or maybe Portuguese India. But maybe there are other examples, but we have not come across. So these are banners that are taken in procession during the feast day, in this case of Saint Joseph. There are other banners as well, but this is just one example to show you of the unique works on our textiles in Goa. I'll just go back to also highlight the embroidery work that is done on the textiles. So we were under the impression that the embroidery was introduced or was done in a large way by the nuns in these convents. But then you start to see elements of Zari and Zardozi, and you wonder, who are these artists? Were they really the nuns? Research is required, not yet done. So we don't have conservators on the team in MOCA. We have to reach out to conservators. And in this case, in 2017, the museum underwent a major upgradation, and we called in INTAC from New Delhi to help us with the conservation of all our collection. So this is an image which you saw yesterday of the infant Jesus, Savior of the world, and some of the paint was lost. The objective here was not to retouch the paint, but just to conserve and clean the object. This was how it was before and how it is now. So the fabric also had frayed and was coming apart, but the conservators did an excellent job and it's restored. So the museum, while we are located within this convent space of a church, and the public have access into the church, and the choir area which was once used by the nuns is today the Museum of Christian Art, the church was in very bad need of repair. It is a state protected monument, but nothing much was being done. So we approached the state government with a proposal for the restoration of this church, and they gave us a grant. We got it restored. Sorry, we messed up image. This is while the conservation work was on, and this was after the conservation. So for this we had a team that came in from Portugal, 2 conservators, and then we worked with a team from Goa on the conservation of the church. This was it's a large panel in the church, a painting of the Virgin Mary and Jesus. Sorry. So that's the before and the after. This is a pulpit in a church. Just to help you understand, a pulpit was a space that was used in the past by the priest. It is in the center of the church, but on one side, and he would stand there and he would preach from there because there was no sound system and no mic. He had to be audible to the congregation. The pulpit has today fallen into disuse. But when we were conserving and restoring the church, this was the wooden pulpit that was on the wall, and we took it down because it needed conservation. And as we were taking it down, we found the original pulpit of the 17th century. So discoveries along the conservation process make the whole project very exciting. And what we have done today is retain the original. The wooden pulpit has been taken down in parts. It has been treated, but we have not yet assembled it. We plan to assemble it as part of an exhibit by itself. This is the restored church. But restoration is a continuous process. So while the funding ended, every year we have to go and put in our own money into the restoration. You can see there are dam patches. Every year we need to address issues before the monsoon. Our programs include concerts, include talks, lectures. Like during the restoration of the church, we did a lecture and workshop on lime plaster in building conservation, because we use traditional mud lime plaster after we deplastered the cement plaster from the walls. We also do Christian art courses. And this is a heritage walk that we do around the Holy Hill. There are 5 monuments. So this was curated as a walk, keeping in mind the local community who are not aware of any other monument besides the Basilica. They come every year on the 3rd of December and the days preceding to pray and for the novenas of St. Francis Xavier, whose feast it is today. But they don't know anything else about the surrounding monuments, about the history, about the architecture, and about the art. So the initiative on MOCA side was to call in Noah Fernandez, who's a conservation architect, to engage the community during these walks. And we do these walks every month. This is an image of a concert that we do. This is a book that we recently produced, and the person second on this side and the gentleman at the end on that side, they are the 2 founding members of the museum. Many have left, many have passed on, but Father Avinash and Mr. Nascimento continue to be the strong pillars of this museum till date, guiding us. Many people asked me how big a team do I have. Initially it was just me, but it was the guidance of the committee members and the dreams that they had, and making those dreams a reality, the efforts over the last 15 years that have paid off. Where do we go from here? We have bigger dreams, bigger projects that we are dreaming of, and hopefully they will materialize. Collaborations, like I mentioned, we do work with INTAC, the Kalus Gulbenkian Foundation. Thanks to the IFA collaboration, we have 2 projects implemented. You all have all heard Kevin, and you all heard Mario's video presentation yesterday. So we are so glad these creative projects are coming through and will be launched in January of 2023. I'll need somebody to play this. This is a short promo video of the museum, but here the idea was not to promote, for you all to just get a glimpse of the museum since we have upgraded it. Hi, I'm Natasha Fernandez, the curator of the Museum of Christian Art, popularly called MoCA. The Museum of Christian Art is in a very unique space, Convent of Santa Monica, which was Asia's first convent to be built. So when you come to the museum, you are entering a very historic space and you're getting to see a very unique collection of Indo-Portuguese Christian art, which was made from the 16th century to the middle of the 20th century, and it includes ivories, wooden sculptures, textiles, furniture and books.
Each time is a brand new fascinating experience, and I think everyone should come here sometime.
The embroidery is beautiful.
Do come to this space, get a great experience in a world-class museum. Thank you.
So we now have the last speaker on the panel, Jayanta Sengupta. Dr. Sengupta is a historian and director of Victoria Memorial Hall, Calcutta. He is the author of 4 books with research interests that include the interrelationship between colonialism, nationalism and democracy, and authoritarianism in modern South Asia.
Thank you so much, Anant. Thank you so much, Arundhati and your predecessors, Shuman, Radhika, all the India Foundation for the Arts team, for collaborating with us and for having me here to speak about the Victoria Memorial Hall, and more specifically on the problems about renewed entry into museums and archives. Time is short. I am not going, I have a presentation, but I'm going to skip through several slides here. In any case, the presentation would seem pretty random. There is no system to it, but I just wanted to show some images to highlight some problems and perspectives of working in a place like Victoria Memorial Hall, which is a largish museum, and it is in fact the India's most visited museum by quite a long margin. In the last normal year, 2019, we had nearly 4 million people coming to the Victoria Memorial Hall campus. And I will quickly, we just had our centenary, which we couldn't really celebrate because of various disruptions, among them COVID, of course. So this is, on the left, there is this photograph of the Victoria Memorial Hall, just, nearing the completion of its construction. This is 5 months before the actual inauguration in December 21, and that is on your right is a photograph taken 100 years later. And if you look back on the nature of the Victoria Memorial Hall as a sort of public space, and this is taken in 1934, you will see very few Indians. It's very bare, and the grounds are very bare. Now they have greened up with a lot of greenery now, but the idea back in the early 20th century was that you were supposed to gaze at this grand marble building in awe, and awe at the marvel and pomposity of the empire. So from this in 1934, this is not really today. I mean, we have banned these kinds of multicolor umbrellas in here, but this gives you a flavor of the kind of very popular, family-friendly, open-ended space that it has become. Now, I will very quickly, this is just a random slide on the various kinds of artworks that we have. We have large oil paintings, mainly by European painters painted from around the 1770s down to about 1850s, all prior to the coming of the camera. And if you look at the initial, this is because we have three focal points really: curation, collaboration, and contemporaneity. So I would start with the curation point a bit, because the Victoria Memorial Hall, for all practical purposes, started as an empire museum. It was conceived by Lord Curzon, as you know, the Viceroy of India at that point of time, and he wanted the memorial to showcase the achievements of the empire and what he described as the achievements of the Indian people under the empire, whatever that means. And therefore, the initial collection is very much like academic art of the kind practiced in salons or royal academies. And Curzon was a very firm believer in this so-called great main theory of history. Thomas Carlyle popularized this theory. So Lord Curzon wanted to populate the museum with paintings and busts of, on the one hand, on the British side, of the royal family, of the viceroys and governor generals, and these so-called great men of commerce and empire, and military generals, social reformers, missionaries, and so on and so forth. And on the Indian side also, of course, quote-unquote good Indians, mainly Indian Maharajas, who had donated their collections to the Victoria Memorial Hall. In fact, Curzon made it a test of loyalty to the British Empire for the Maharajas to donate from their art collection. And what Curzon also described, this is very interesting, because it also foregrounds the point of curation and recuration, is Curzon also marked, and he writes about this, that he wanted a place for whom he described as honorable adversaries, led by Tipu Sultan and Lakshmi Bai and Maharaja Ranjit Singh, of whom there are many, many artifacts, hundreds of them in our collection from the very outset. But he systematically obliterated whom he regarded as dishonorable adversaries, like Nana Sahib and Tatia Topi, those figures of 1857 who were variously connected with quote-unquote dishonorable episodes like the Kanpur massacre and so on and so forth. So, in order to recurate the Victoria Memorial Hall, after independence, artifacts belonging to these people, initially obliterated, were acquired. So we have, and we were just speaking with Professor Partho Datto now, we have Tatia Topi's Achkan now on display in the Victoria Memorial Hall, and also artifacts connected with Nana Sahib and so on and so forth. So, yeah, I will skip through these slides, because for a long time, until the turn of the 20th century, the old imperial display of the great men theory and of the visual representation of India in European landscape painting, in the picturesque, in people and social scenes did not really change. And this is really a very old and tired looking display of the portrait gallery, which we had as late as 1976. What we have now done, I wouldn't say that we have now done, we did this for a few months in 2020 when we recurated the entire front side galleries after civil renovation, and we did a sort of display of the India in the European visual imagination in the 18th and 19th centuries. We also gave a place to big events of colonial history like imperial pageants, the darbars and revolts and so on and so forth, and imperial policies of big impact like commercialization of agriculture and so on and so forth. It was a nice exhibition, which was then, there are some samples like from the Thomas and Daniel oil paintings, which is one of the core collections of the Victoria Memorial Hall. Some watercolors and lithographs on imperial economics, these were all put on display, but we had to dismantle that exhibition in late 2020 in order to make space for a largely facsimile multimedia exhibition on Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, which the Prime Minister came and inaugurated in January 2021. And that exhibition fills up the entire Victoria Memorial Hall, and that is supposed to end in January 23. So we hope we'll keep our fingers crossed that once that exhibition is dismantled, we will be able to put back our own artwork in. So yeah, I mean, so what, we are especially grateful to the partnership with India Foundation for the Arts because it actually addresses all the three focal points mentioned by Anant. So it helps us to curate or recurate our core collection from perspectives other than the entire, the sort of simplistic great men inventory of the original imperial display. And we were selected for two projects by IFA. One is the scholarly project. It has been talked about by Arjun Motwani, who does this project on capturing India. It's part of a website that we put in place a few months ago about early colonial artists and their depiction of Indian life. So it addresses both the focal point on the theme of collaboration with IFA and the recuration of our collection. But again, I will just briefly point out this point about curation. We should remember that we are a large government-funded museum. So our case is we are sort of protected from the disruptive effects of things like COVID, for instance. We did not have layoffs, we did not have salary cuts, and so on and so forth. That's an advantage. That's a big advantage compared to many of our peers. But one disadvantage of this is the kind of, and Victoria Memorial, because it's the city's visual icon, also provides good photo ops for the central government to plot various kinds of big mega events which need to be managed, and therefore that kind of distracts the popular attention away from the things that really matter, the sort of art exhibitions that we should really do. Now, for nearly 100 years, we have been suffering from a lack of adequate in-house curatorial expertise to really sort of, to connect the missing dots in our provenance history, in our curatorial research. So we partner with many institutions. So we work with guest curators, we work with art historians for exhibitions, for curation, and so on and so forth. I'll give you just a brief example of the illustrated catalogue of the exhibits of the Victoria Memorial Hall, which was published in 1925, and which was the work of Percy Brown, the first secretary and curator, who worked with Lord Curzon himself to write, object histories, which then found their way into our accession register. And I will give this brief example of this painting, which is still there in this gallery called the Royal Gallery, still the Royal Gallery. We, by strange enough as it sounds, we're still called the Victoria Memorial Hall, and our address is still 1 Queensway. I mean, we don't know whose queen it is anyway, but we are, although the specter of name change always hangs like the Damocles' sword, but we are still this painting, which is widely described as the second largest oil painting on a single canvas in the world. I cannot authenticate this because there is no academic art history book which is, which confirms this, but this is by the Russian painter Vasily Vereshchagin, who painted this just before the Delhi Darbar, when the Prince of Wales comes and travels with the Maharaja of Jaipur in front of the Hawa Mahal in Jaipur. So Jaipur procession. It's 24 feet wide, 17 feet high. So it came to the 1921 initial collection in the Victoria Memorial. But how? Just a kind of teaser. So what does the 1925 illustrated catalogue say? I have highlighted, presented in 1905 by His Highness the Maharaja of Jaipur, who had purchased the picture through Lord Curzon from Mr. Edward Malley of New Haven in USA. And Vereshchagin was a Russian war painter working in Tsarist Russia, and he traveled to India twice in the 1870s and 1880s. And he had an exhibition in Vienna in 1881. And it sort of seems, because we cannot authenticate this, that Edward Malley, the American, purchased this painting from the Vienna exhibition in 1881. But how did the Maharaja of Jaipur come across it? And then we searched and we found out that Edward Malley was an Irishman who, unlike many Irishmen in 19th century US, was a rich man. He was a businessman, and he had this Malley's department store, which was the largest department store in New Haven. And from that, so we have all these kinds of questions, which are curatorial questions that are unsolved. You have this Vasily Vereshchagin, this character, the Russian painter in Tsarist Russia, who is traveling to different parts of the world in the age of empire, in the 1870s and 80s, and documenting the brutalities of war throughout Eastern Europe and throughout continental Europe. It also sort of points to European art markets in that period. The Vienna art market is one. It contains within itself the history of Irish immigration, and it's a question how Malley became rich and how he was drawn to procuring the kind of cultural capital through large format paintings which displayed Oriental pageantry. So this is a curatorial question which we haven't been able to solve. Princely India and travel to the West. Maharaja of Jaipur is known to have traveled to the US at least twice, but it's not known whether this painting came from New Haven itself. And princely loyalty to the British Indian Empire. So these are curatorial questions which we depend on other art historians to connect these dots. And now, fortunately, in the centenary year, we were selected for the 100-year history of Victoria Memorial's collection, and architecture has been selected for a research grant by the National Endowment for the Humanities in the United States. And therefore, we now are collaborating with the Paul Mellon Center of British Studies in British Art in Yale to do a workshop with us in January and to throw more light on this painting. So this is the kind of curatorial question. I will skip through this. This is another interesting curatorial question whose roots go back into the imperial past, but which has an air of contemporaneity, because on the left there is this Clive statue installed in the Victoria Memorial Hall in 1912. It came to the building as it was built in 1912, and it was the twin statue of another bronze statue which was installed in Whitehall, both commissioned by Lord Curzon. And while that statue in London is now the target of a very, very strong Remove Clive campaign, especially in the wake of George Floyd and the worldwide outburst against empire and racism, this statue in Clive is still there in the Victoria Memorial Hall. That is a contemporary question, but there is an interesting thing which has happened to it. So this is again a close-up of the London statue on the left, the Victoria Memorial statue on the right. So it has now been covered in a glass box, which is something that was done. This was not our curatorial decision. This was a sort of quote-unquote curatorial decision forced on us from the top. When the Netaji exhibition was installed in January 2021, it was thought that the presence of statues like these, and these are quite, it's a strange thing about Victoria Memorial Hall that the most aggrandizing, the most imperialist of figures like Lord Dalhousie or Marquis of Ellenborough or Lord Lytton, they are all housed inside the Victoria Memorial Hall, while the more liberal, more friendly towards India, like Lord Ripon or William Bentinck, they are all out in the gardens, in the care of bards, as it were. So in order to create an atmosphere for the sort of, hyper-nationalism that came with the Prime Minister's visit to inaugurate the Netaji exhibition, all these statues, including the central portrait statue of Queen Victoria under the dome, were put into glass boxes. So this is, I don't want to say that this is our version of the present engagement with the removal of statues, imperialist statues all over the world. But this is a kind of engagement with the theme of decolonization. A strange one, but this is what we have done. I will just quickly skip through because we are doing this session on museums and archives. I will quickly talk about we have not a very systematic archives, but we have archival collections which are episodic, which are sort of fragmentary, but they have been open to scholars. Like we have there is not a picture here, but we have the very important archival collection of the documents of the Calcutta Lottery Committee, which was involved in raising subscriptions for creating Calcutta's infrastructure in the 19th century. And in fact, Professor Partho Dotto wrote his book on Calcutta by being one of the first scholars to use that archive in the Lottery Committee. We are a modern history museum. We have zero archaeology, but strangely enough, we have the letters of Sir Alexander Cunningham, the archaeologist, who excavated places like Bharhut and Sanchi. And that is now, because they were open to the scholar, historian Upinder Singh, that has now become the first Victoria Memorial Oxford University Press co-publication. And what is likely to become the second Victoria Memorial Oxford University co-publication is a selection from these huge archival documents of the case notes and papers of the second Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Bengal, Justice John Hyde, who was second after Sir Elijah Impey, who signed the order of execution for Maharaja Nand Kumar. So Justice John Hyde's papers are an invaluable document for assessing the legal foundations of the early East India Company state. And they have been used by scholars all the while, but now it is going to be an edited collection of the most important cases, about 15 of them, including the first Englishman to be tried for murder in Bengal, with a long editorial introduction. So these are archival collections that we have opened up to scholars and which are leading to publications. We have opened up this is Rabindranath Tagore's handwriting. We have a few of his manuscripts. And this is a very interesting page because this has the original version of the poem, which was later set to music, Amar Mukti Aloe Aloe, Ei Akashe. But it turns out that the left one, which Rabindranath Tagore wrote the original poem in 1926, while traveling in Germany, had a different lyric. It had the lyric, Amar Mukti Ganesh, my liberation is in this music, in the sky. And then years later, when he set this to music, he changed the lyrics of that. And the right one is from the Verioram edition of Rabindranath Tagore's manuscripts, compiled by the School of Cultural Texts in Jadavpur University. And on this note, I will just briefly mention that we have a new collaboration. It's now more than a year old with the University of Chicago for building an archive on the documents and ephemera of Adhunik Bangla Gan, modern Bengali music, modern Bengali songs. And we have started with the archives of Shalil Chaudhuri and Manna De and Shudhin Das Gupta. And here is a page from Shalil Chaudhuri's papers, his original song books, where you can see, like the Tagore manuscript on the preceding page, here is the lyrics of this famous song, Anto Bihin Katena Ar Jano Biroheri Ei Din, sung by Asha Bhosle. In a jaunty tune, completely different in flavor from the very soulful, slow music of Biraho, or the yearning from separation. So it turns out that Sholil Chaudhary also had other differently composed stanzas which were not used in the versions that he... So we have these archival records now, including these new archives on music and ephemera, where you can see the journeys of creators, journeys of songwriters, composers, and so on and so forth. This is again Sholil Chaudhary's diary from January 1943, when he was a teenager. I'm just showing the first page of the diary with doodles and all that. So these are the new archival ventures that we are going into now. I will just briefly, in our public programs, we work with, because this is an important question that comes up, how we engage with modernity, how we make space for the voices of the marginal, of the small voices, and so on and so forth. Personally, I think that is what our future lies. We have to figure out a model for museums to talk about our many pasts, not one singular past, but many, many pasts. And it's very difficult for government museums, we know. It's even more difficult for museums that are supposedly universal, like the Indian Museum or the National Museum. Who speaks for the nationalness of the National Museum? Who speaks for the Indianness of the Indian Museum? We don't know. These are troubled questions, as we all know. But what we can't do through exhibitions and permanent collections, we can always do through public programs. And I will just end with just showing you two public programs that we did last week in World Heritage Week. One was a reinterpretation of this episode about the demoness Hidimba in Mahabharata. And this is a queer feminist group who performed this and who will come back next week for another small exhibition on Kuttu performance from Kanchipuram, which was originally an all-male domain and now being taken over by women. So this is a counterintuitive and a sort of subversive reinterpretation of our canons that we did last week. And we also did this program in Bangla with history primers, 3 young scholars, with a grant from the Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung, and this project is housed in the Institute of Development Studies in Kolkata, have written 3 free books for 10 to 14-year-old children on 3 very troubled subjects of modern history: partition, citizenship, and linguistic federalism. So we had a session on that, a discussion session in which a free-flowing. So, and these are all, as we all know, these are very, very contemporary subjects and highly debated subjects, highly politicized too. How to expose young children to these subjects in a user-friendly language without losing the complexity of these dimensions. So that's all I have to say for now. But if there is, again, India Foundation for the Arts has given us the opportunity for engaging with contemporaneity through the creative project, which is Madhuja Mukherjee's, which was also Madhuja talked about yesterday. And this exhibition, this media installation, many of you will probably visit tomorrow to see. Again, an installation on the affective geographies of Kolkata, created by contemporary processes like displacements and evacuation and resettlement of refugees, squatters, and so on and so forth. So these are, again, we are pushing at the edges of what we can do by doing these exhibitions. Just in the gallery opposite this media installation, there is also a new exhibition with photographs of nature taken by students of Kolkata. These are students from 15 to 23, and this is through a partnership with the Natural History Museum in London, in which these students were selected and trained for ethical nature photography with a view to with a view to documenting the impact of climate change on biodiversity, which is one of the most, one of the most serious global challenges for the humanity in contemporary times. So that's what we try to do a little, but we are of the opinion that if you try pushing at the edges a little bit at a time, then the door probably at some point of time will a little more open, right? Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Jayanta. We have about 25 minutes to close, and I'm still feeling very greedy. I feel like saying a few things and ask one or two questions, but I won't insist on an answer from all of you. Very quickly, from all of the presentations, I'm hearing 2-3 things. Right? One is that the idea of the nation state and the idea of the body, the human body, is there in everything that has been said until now. Whether it is the infant Jesus body, or it is the rural laboring body, or it is the medicalized body, or it is all of those great names which are there in some form or the other. And cutting through all of them is this idea of something called nation, nationalism, and some kind of colonization that's going on. So something is beginning to happen or begun to happen in the recent past all around us, which is creating this need for opening up new ways of doing these things. And I think that within that doing these things in new ways, a lot of us are really searching for some kind of a tentativeness, right, where you don't want to close things too harshly, too strongly, which is the reason why a lot of us are also looking for performative ways of dealing with things, right? So the idea of the performance actually gives us some way of dealing with that anxiety about closing it too soon, right? You open it up in some ways and then signify things in certain ways. So keeping that very broadly in mind, if as institutions you all want to say anything more about collaborations and what you're hoping for and so on, that's one opportunity for you to speak. And the other is that since you all have heard from each other for the first time, if you have questions for each other, please use the same moment for doing that, and then we can open it up for the floor, because I'm sure lots of people have lots of questions to ask within the next 20 minutes. Yeah? So in whichever order, do you want to go first, Radhika?
Okay, so I think I will answer it a little differently, because we are, as I was talking to you in the morning also, it's the institutional regulations that matters a lot to us in the museum, because we are a part of the History of Medicine department. So here, I think it was the COVID experience that changed things a lot. It was a shift in perspective, especially for me, because we were going to work on an everyday basis. And the thing that I can see outside, I mean, when I stand near my window, is the embalming center, where the bodies are prepared before the dissection. So during the COVID pandemic, almost for 2 weeks, we saw so many body bags. And then we were just standing there and didn't know what to do. And then we would have calls after calls, where colleagues would actually tell us the helplessness in which they had to deal with situations. And there was a lot of burnout during this point in time. And we kept asking ourselves, in what way can we as a humanities as well as a history of medicine division contribute to it? Is there a way for it? So we started these small online engagements where we started talking to students, medical students, for whom, sitting at home and then doing, learning things, and then, feeling that helplessness, that ambiguity, actually made us push boundaries. It was at this point in time that we took a decision to actually open up the museum as well as create stories which is much more than what is already there? Can we actually bring in perspectives that is not the linear understanding of the history of medicine that we already know? Is there a way for us to connect? For example, when I see the painting of penicillin in our museum itself, Alexander Fleming and then Petri dish, this is a favorite story and people just love it. But do we know that after penicillin was discovered, the companies in US actually went forward and there was a race to create this penicillin. And it was an Indian called Yallapragada Subbarao who actually played a very, very central role, in having these the antibiotics that we know today, mass manufactured. And he had a story of his own. He had left his child bride in India and gone to US and never came back. She never remarried. She was always this loyal wife to him. And the letters that he writes is an open archive. If you have an opportunity, please read it. It's amazing the way, a scientist actually speaks to his child bride. It's in English. It's in English. It's been translated. No. It's Yallapragada Subbarao Archives. Yeah, it's online and it's free. And then during the Surat plague, the tetracycline that actually came to India was something that was a contribution of Yallapragada Subbarao, who had died much earlier because of heart attack. So do we actually know such stories? Can we actually push the boundaries? Because we are in a medical college, there is a certain understanding of how the medicine should be taught. So can we actually ask the students to reflect? Can we ask the students to think more? Is something that actually led us to collaborate with different organizations. This is when I actually met Suman. Our story with Suman is very interesting because I keep telling, it was almost 1 year of to and fro that went. And then after everything was signed and things were in place, a girl actually walks to the museum and she says she would like to animate things. And I call Suman, I'm like, now what will I do with an animator? Was my first reaction. Because I was thinking in a certain way. Research, archives, we want certain. But this actually helped us break boundaries within our own minds as well as in the museum. Try to look at things in new perspective. Along with this, I think also medical education has made humanities compulsory part of their curriculum right now. So I was sharing with Anant also how, we have a lot of students as well as teachers coming in right now telling us, tell us something about how to teach humanities. I have 20 minutes. Do it as fast as you can. We say that it's a process, but nobody is ready to listen to us. It's not very easy to convey such ideas, but with collaborations like what we are doing right now, I think we will be able to explain things much better than when one person is standing there and trying to, impose her ideas on people as such. So this is how.
Okay.
Yeah. So there are a few questions that I have for Radhika, but I'll come to them later. While I was listening to everyone and thinking about this issue of funding and in terms of money, I suddenly realized that there are so many other things which enrich us much more than money could. One of them is, for example, Keshav Wagmare's work, which we have on Pari, and the kind of understanding that his knowledge brings to the rest of us. Things like the Namantar of the university in Aurangabad. In Maharashtra, the term Namantar itself embodies a whole history, politics, geography, and students' movement, oppression of Dalits, and everything. And when you say Namantar, literally the word just means change of name. But in Maharashtra, Namantar has a different connotation and it covers all this. But there were a lot of us, even from Maharashtra, who were not aware of the history behind this word and what it really embodies. So that's something that we've got on Pari now. because of the collaboration with IFA. I don't think any amount of funding can, replace this kind of enrichment. The translations programs that we have, we translate into about 14 languages. And we heard that some of the students who are from non-English speaking backgrounds, they read a story on Pari. Every story is translated into all the languages. So some of the students use our stories to learn English. So they read the story in Odia, for example, and then they would read the same in English and, try to learn. So this is something, again, which no kind of funding can replace. And I'm very sorry you couldn't see the video on the grindmill songs, but now here's again another thing. The grindmill songs originated in villages. Two social scientists captured it, created a database, and they gave it to us to preserve and create stories from it. So from the physical space, it has come online. Recently, the grindmill songs went into 2 museum exhibitions. So from online, it's again going into a physical space where, city dwellers can look at it. It went to South Korea at Gwangju and at Gropiusbau in Berlin. It was exhibited there. Similarly, there are a lot of other museums who want to make displays of photographs from our stories in their spaces. So the question I have actually for Radhika is, we have this collection of stories which our reporters went out into the field during the COVID days. Many of them themselves got infected, they got COVID, some of them twice, but still we captured more than 200 stories. Some of them, I don't know, can they become a part of medical history? Is there a way that we can collaborate? Or are there documents, online which may be available in a digital format, which we could have in our library? We have an online library. So, those are kind of the kind of collaborations that I look forward to. Yeah.
Let's move. Yeah, just come back then. Yes. You're fine. You can just speak.
Okay. Am I audible?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry. I will just say a couple of things which are pretty basic. One, I just remember you began with the politics of the body, and that sort of reminds me of this funny image. There is a statue of Lord Cornwallis in Victoria Memorial Hall, in a space where we have many open-air talks and performances and all that. And it's a classic case of imperial self-representation. Lord Cornwallis was he was a portly man of ample proportions, short, bald, with a paunch. But in that statue, his head is fixed on the torso of a Roman gladiator with a six-pack.
Oh.
And that sort of gives the impression that the British are the new Rome. So the politics of body is everywhere in the Victoria Memorial Hall. So on that, I will just mention two exhibitions very briefly, which sort of played around this politics of body. One is the very iconic, very famous installation that Vivan Sundaram did back in 1998 called the History Project, Modern Bengal, in the Darbar Hall, where he sort of subverted and turned upside down the grandiose pomposity of the Darbar Hall. And he brought in installations on Bengal's checkered history of modernity with its reform and conservatism, with its labor movements, women's movements, and so on and so forth. So all the important figures in Bengal's historical transition in the 19th century basically were dealt with, but from a non-homage point of view. So that was, in a broad sense, subverting the masculinity and pomposity of the building itself, of the imperial, the very macho imperial self-image itself. We have another scholar who has written on this, Indira. So I'm just reminded of her work also. So that's, I will skip the second exhibition, but we did another exhibition in 2020 very briefly on Jallianwala Bagh, which was which was a sort of public history exercise on what we remember about Jallianwala Bagh and what we are allowed to remember about Jallianwala Bagh. So it's about, it was an exhibition in remembrance and forgetting, and a sort of a discourse on both colonial and neo-colonial terror. So these all, and that was also deliberately done at a space which was formerly the site of the Presidency Jail, which was replaced to make space for the Victoria Memorial Building. But on this point of the archive, I'll say two brief things. One is that, as I said, there is something called the museum movement in India. Everybody keeps referring, even the Ministry of Culture refers to it. And by the way, I think I should mention this, that the Ministry of Culture in Government of India, they have this scheme called the Museum Grant Scheme. I don't know whether all of you are aware of this project. Each year, they disburse about 30 crores in grants to museums, new museum projects, or for museums to renovate themselves, right? So, you know, those who are not aware of this, I would really encourage finding more about this project and then applying if possible. But there is some, you know, there's a fascinating presentation about these medical archives, and I had the privilege of being part of a conference on archives in the French Institute in Pondicherry. And where we came across all these kinds of magnificent but small archives, specialized archives. And I think some of them are doing absolutely fantastic, or like the NCBS archive of Venkat Srinivasan in Bangalore. So I was just wondering, and this is a problem that we also face with, that many of us work in silos. We open up our archives to scholars. But I think we should, talking about inventories, we should really make larger inventories for collaboration and digital collaboration, merging projects, merging collections if possible. If possible to do within the framework of our rules, institutional rules, and therefore it will, so that all of these archives are known to each other, and for scholars, the scholars would also know where to look. So that, whether that is possible, you know, this seems to be a good opportunity or good moment to wonder if that is possible. And the other is, as museums, I think we should work more with, and we should highlight museums like, for instance, small museums who speak for marginal, like this museum called Arna Jharna in Rajasthan, the desert museum, which is a museum on brooms, which become a metaphor for life in the desert. Or something like the Remember Bhopal exhibition, museum in Bhopal, purely on the Union Carbide gas tragedy, which is about remembering something like the Holocaust. So these museums should, and we try to, through our public programs, to highlight these museums as far as possible. But I think that's where our future lies, because the whole logic of these large museums, national, Indian, universal museums, have been completely messed up. However much there will something like a Government of India always be ready with its, you know, with its singular didactic narratives. But we should, within this broad space of government and non-government spaces, we should try to carve out ways out of that universalizing, homogenizing trajectory. So that's where I think our future lies. Natasha.
So I would like to talk a little bit more about what we did with the upgradation project, and thank you for mentioning the museum grant scheme, because we looked up that scheme which we had availed of previously, but this time the grant amount was significantly more, and we could see our dreams getting realized if our project was sanctioned. We had a dream because I was seeing the textiles deteriorating, the collection deteriorating, and I said, this can't be displayed like this for another 10 years. We will have no collection to show. So I got the Gulbenkian team interested in coming to give us technical support. The INTAC came in for the conservation. So we had a project proposal ready. We went to the Ministry of Culture, who looked at it and approved it, and the upgradation started. And those 3 years of intense work, where right from the building restoration to the collection getting restored to a new museographic layout and a thematic display based on the collection was laid out. We did a lot more during that time. We hired new staff because that was the time the museum was closed. Young staff, energy, enthusiasm, technology savvy. So we got all that in the museum, not with too many staff, just two new staff, and started working on a brand image for the museum. Not many of us think of a brand image for a museum, but it's very much required. A brand image, a new website, and we started working on Google Arts and Culture metadata. So we used that time really well to do a lot of things. And when we were completing the project and were to inaugurate on the 30th of March of 2020, and in the phase of going to put our objects into the display cases, the lockdown was announced. All our teams had to disperse. And we reopened only in May of 2022. Some sections opened last year, but the entire museum opened this year. But our efforts didn't go in vain. The IFA grant came through. Kevin and Anirudh started working on the podcast. Mario's exhibition will culminate in Jan next year. And we started, because of the pandemic, showcasing and talking about the museum virtually. And there was a large audience in India and around the world, especially Portugal, and we could also invite speakers from Portugal to talk about their research interest in India and in Goa. So I think the museum's visibility increased during that period, though we couldn't open physically, but our outreach was much wider during this period. Now that we have reopened, in my head I've always perceived that it would be very challenging to bring school children into the museum space, especially because it is the Museum of Christian Art, looked at as Museum of Christianity. And in my head, I'm always thinking, how are we going to justify, what will the parents of the children think when they are coming into museum spaces? But we took a bold decision to write in letters to all the schools in Goa, and so far from the time that we reopened to now, we've got about 12 educational institutions, that's schools and colleges, that have come in large numbers. There are times that we can't accommodate them all, so we break them up into separate groups. They all come in and have interactive sessions which are highly interactive. So I think I will say that we are in the right path. We are getting regular footfalls thanks to Google reviews. So it's a mix of what we do and what is digitally done as well that is propelling the museum forward. Historical need of the moment for me has always been to set up in Goa a conservation laboratory. It's not so easy because we don't have trained people, but I think it's really required, because not only in our churches but in our homes we might have so many objects that need to be conserved, and we need to reach out to INTAC in Delhi or maybe the CSMVS in Mumbai. They are our closest and better equipped laboratories. But the dream is to now work towards setting up a conservation laboratory with their support. You know, we need the experts to come in to help us set it up. So that's the dream for the future.
Thank you very much. I'm not going to say much more. I just wanted to say that apart from the nation state and the body theme that was there all through, one thing that I missed when I first heard all the presentations is the COVID and its disruption. I mean, as a teacher, I was constantly peering into the homes of students through the camera. And one of the things that we realized is that our universities have never created conditions in which you could think about the classroom as a space of caring, right? And this was one moment when we were looking into the homes of the students, when suddenly the classroom had to become a space of caring. You realized how patriarchal the classroom has always been, and how it was completely disintegrating because of something like COVID, which is totally unexpected. And I think that has affected all of us in many, many different ways. And so thank you so much for bringing out those sets of issues. We're opening for the floor, 10 minutes. Yeah? Okay. Please.
Actually, we have to think about the museum. But in the 21st century, we have to think about the open air museum. So if you place some sculptures, creative sculptures, or old or new, that should be placed in open air museum. These are new concept. Another concept is towards COVID-19, few doctors and few private hospitals, they earn the money from the people. If they snatch the money, actually, they snatch the money from the people. The bill is near about 10 lakhs, 15 lakhs. And party will take 2 lakhs from each doctor. So morality and humanity is necessary for the doctor and for the politician. Because museum should give new enlightenment towards morality and humanity.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Shalini.
Yep.
Shalini.
Hi. My name is Shalini Wadwana. I was a moderator in the panel in the morning. I'm a curator, I'm a writer, and I'm a teacher. My question and thought process is for Mrs. Sengupta. So basically, in my area of research,
Can you speak a little bit louder?
In my area of research, I've worked with 19th century cultural repatriation, reparations, and specifically the nuances of British India at the time. So statues and the power and political symbolism has been a huge part of debate within my growth. As you rightly said, one of the ways in which any museum becomes relevant is to have the kind of programmings that you're having, which is to elucidate queer histories, which is to elucidate subjects of colonialism, nationalism and citizenship with young students. That was very admirative. What I still do want to understand though, when it comes to statues, considering, as you rightly said, the Black Lives Matter movement put a whole new understanding towards statues and what they represent. Beyond the mirror boxes, would there have been another way to highlight that aspect that maybe Clive was involved in, while not doing a sort of like a covering up to an extent of him? And the other nuance also is the fact that Delhi and Bombay, for example, have had these histories with statues. So Delhi right now has a Coronation Park where all these statues are taken, dumped, and then, of course, refurbished and put over there. Similarly, in Hanuman Circle in Bombay, all those statues were taken, and right now some of them are in the backyards of the Bhaudaji Lad Museum, chipped, because that was the kind of set of attacks that were made on the faces of those statues. So I just wanted to understand, in context of these cities, could this have been any different? That's all.
Can we take one more question and then to both of them? Okay.
Yeah, so can you hear me? Okay. I'm Saptarshi. I'm part of the Disappearing Dialogues, and we have been lucky actually to have worked with both Pari. We were part of the Victoria Memorial Hall's Moving Kolkata Moving project. So it's kind of a provocation or maybe a new way to look at things, but I also feel that beyond the archives, the museum as sites for these conflicting questions, these things that we don't want to talk about or we want to talk about but we don't have space to talk about. So museums both, not only as archives but as spaces where these conversations might be had, can be had, is a very new yet interesting perspective for our work and also for the museum spaces themselves. Now, how it would look is something which I am quite curious to know, how it would look for archives and museums which are predominantly online and data-driven, vis-a-vis museums which are also very important institutional spaces of the city. So when it brings in all these other conversations into these spaces, what does it mean for that museum to be standing for these other things also? Like recently Shumana is here and they were having the Kolkata as that whole thing completely transformed the idea of the museum from being one institutional or one spatial entity into multiple points of conversation of happenings in the city, and kind of changed also whose city and who can come into these spaces. So this is just something to maybe, if you have some ideas on this.
Thank you both. To answer your question first, yes, of course, several things could have been done with those statues, and I'll tell you what the fact is that. And we deal with, Victoria Memorial Hall deals with this all the time, but especially so over the last 4 or 5 years. We are, as we deal with this sort of mandate called decolonization, which now is a buzzword everywhere, including Government of India, which doesn't really necessarily know what it actually means. But we are trying to figure out a position somewhere in between. On the one hand, you have the Shashi Tharoor position, which is partly driven by the need to make his book a bestseller, is that the Victoria Memorial Hall should be turned into a museum that would showcase only the atrocities of the empire. Now this, and he's happy writing this to the Prime Minister, and the Prime Minister sends this to the Culture Minister, and the Culture Minister then sends this to me, and I have to answer this question, and my humble answer is that we can only be a museum on the basis of the collection that we hold, right? If it is a collection primarily started by Lord Curzon, and then gradually you have acquired more things, then you cannot readily become a museum showcasing the atrocities of the empire. So on the one hand, there is this position. On the other hand, there is the other position which is becoming sort of increasingly stronger now, that we should do the sort of a full Swadeshi turnaround, which is also very difficult because our collection actually straddles both colonial history. We are trying to recurate without obliterating, like Curzon did to Nana Sahib and Tantia Topi. We are trying to recurate, by eliminating unnecessary relevant royal figures who do not really figure even in British collections now, but doing a sort of a visual history of representations from colonialism to nationalism. That's what we do. Now, the Netaji Subhash Bose exhibition, for which those statues were covered in glass boxes, was like everything, I guess everything to do with any prime ministerial visit was decided all in 3 weeks. And that exhibition was made in 3 weeks flat. And everything, all the decisions were taken in 3 weeks. There was no time to remove the statues. There was a quick discussion, and I'm just sharing things off the record. There was a quick discussion about whether to clothe these statues in a sort of funny, and it had been done in, I think, in Paris, probably in the Pompidou Center. Some of the iconic French historical statues were were clothed in haute couture kind of fashion. So that was quickly discussed, but because there was no time to do all of this, the quick solution was to cover them in glass boxes, reflective glass boxes, so the reflection will also give you an illusion about the
Spatiality.
About the spaciousness of the hall and about the abundance of nationalist objects. It's an illusion. So that was a quick solution. What we now need to figure out is how to recreate, because we 2 years ago we did a survey with the Archaeological Survey of India about removing these statues and placing them in the garden. And now the problem turned out to be that all of these statues had their own foundations going deep into the ground, and therefore there was no way you could remove those statues without at least partially damaging the heritage floor. So that was why the Board of Trustees, everything was possible, but that was the Archaeological Survey of India's view, and then the Board of Trustees decided against removing these statues. Now, statues have been removed from various, we all know this is an age of statues being removed. In India though, I would say this, that you have in Bristol the statue had been damaged, all the Confederate statues now, from the Capitol these Confederate statues have been removed and all that. In India though, and in Bengal, this is my personal view, but I think there is also a lot of Raj nostalgia going on because the Bengalis were the first community outside of the English speaking world to learn English and to inhabit in multiple language universes. So there is a nostalgia for something called the Victoria Memorial Hall, and there is a nostalgia for a road called Queensway, which you won't see anywhere. Every time the Prime Minister visits, before that, I get a million questions from the media about whether our name is going to be changed. I say, I don't know. It has not changed. Right. So, in Delhi, you see, in Willingdon Park, all the imperial statues had been mutilated. Not in Kolkata. Kolkata have the strongest thing that has happened is the statues outside of the Victoria Memorial Hall have been removed, relocated to Barakpur, in the governor's Barakpur residence and so on. But nothing more than that. In India, so far the empire and racism, in India the contemporary repercussions have been very, very limited. And I would say that perhaps the most important statue that has been mutilated of late in India is that of Ambedkar, not the imperialist statues.
Yeah.
So that tells you a story. It's a very dark story and something that we don't want to dwell about. Is about the alternative histories of social inequities in India, which have not really paralleled the worldwide assertion against empire and racism. So the best we can do is to recurate those statues and show what kind of a figure that this guy called Clive really was, which we were ready to do. We had done the text and all that, but then the PM visit came along and we had to scurry to a quick solution. Right. So and to you, yes, I think what we have tried to do, and I would like to think that we have at least partially we have done this, is to reimagine the Victoria Memorial Hall not merely as a museum but as a place for conversations, as a place for conversations of all kinds, which do not necessarily are limited to the mandate of modern Indian history and heritage. Look at and also we collaborate on a regular basis with DAG, and Shumana was here. I think she's still here. So we do this curatorial. It's called Curious Curatorium with our objects, and we have done these workshops all the time. But over the last 7, 8, 9 years, we have done talks. And these talks are all on YouTube. They are for anybody to see, including people who are watching us, on human rights and on gender discrimination and democracy and development and intolerance. We have done sessions on intolerance in the Kolkata Literary Meet with funding of the Ministry of Culture. And I think that is a non-zero thing to do in reimagining the Victoria Memorial as a place for conversation. So yes, we have various limitations about what as a government institution we can do, and we do not want to ruffle feathers. But even within the ambit, it's my experience that if you do things which are received positively and are not too controversial, then people, you can get away with doing these things. And we have sort of made Victoria Memorial into a place for conversation. And so we emphasize on criticality and alternative voices and so on and so forth. So we have done that.
Thank you, everyone. I mean, I would really love to continue this conversation for much longer, but we'll have to make room for the others.